Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this last lecture in this year's series of the Tuohy Chair. Those of you who have been with us for the previous 5 know that we have met a great group of intrepid, bright, faithful women apostles of the faith. Very inspiring. I think you're all looking forward to hearing about Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Those of you who have been here know how inspiring Dr. Kelly Spoerl has been. And so let us give Dr. Spoerl a warm, very rousing welcome for this, her last lecture tonight.
Good evening. Tonight I'd like to finish this series of lectures on Catholic women encountering religious pluralism by looking at what one recent commentator called, quote, certainly the most famous religious celebrity of our time, unquote, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, founder of the Missionaries of Charity, who are committed to providing wholehearted free service to the poorest of the poor across the world. As a religious celebrity, Mother Teresa has been nothing short of controversial, inspiring adulation and vituperation in equal measure, or so it seems. For many, she is nothing less than a saint, a judgment the Roman Catholic hierarchy would seem to endorse in view of her rapid beatification under John Paul II in 2003, only 6 years after her death in September of 1997. Benedict XVI mentioned Mother Teresa 3 times in his first encyclical written as Pope, ranking her alongside Francis of Assisi and Ignatius Loyola as one of the, quote, lasting models of social charity for all people of goodwill, unquote. Yet for her critics, such as Vanity Fair columnist Christopher Hitchens and feminist writer Germaine Greer, Mother Teresa was a demagogue, an obscurantist, a religious imperialist, a fundamentalist, a political operative, a primitive sermonizer, and an accomplice of worldly secular powers. What is clear is that Mother Teresa is, next to the current pontiff and his predecessor, the most well-known Catholic of contemporary times. Someone who, with her rosary beads and devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, embodies what most people the world over can recognize as classic Catholic devotion. Yet it was surprising to learn, as I did in the course of researching this talk, that this most Catholic of women emerged from obscurity in not one, but 2 of the most religiously diverse environments on earth, was aided throughout her ministry by persons of other faiths, and moreover seems to have welcomed that assistance in a spirit of self-consciously embraced and articulated religious tolerance. My task tonight will be to lay out the evidence for the multi-faith context of Mother Teresa's celebrated ministry and her religious response to it. However, honesty requires me to admit at the outset that in doing this, I will be reporting the ideals Mother Teresa articulated in public statements about the religiously diverse context in which she was active. As some of you may know, in addition to the numerous hagiographical books and articles written about Mother Teresa, even before her death in 1997, there is a growing body of literature critical of Mother Teresa and of the Missionaries of Charity. Much of it claiming that regardless of the policies Mother Teresa might have articulated about tolerance and respect for others of different faiths, such policies were not implemented in the actual operations of institutions run by the missionaries, even during Mother Teresa's lifetime. One of the first and certainly one of the most notorious of such critical studies was Christopher Hitchens' book, The Missionary Position, Mother Teresa in Theory and Practice, published in 1995. Incidentally, you may be interested to know that it has been reported that Hitchens was deposed by church authorities conducting interviews in Mother Teresa's beatification process in the year 2000. Now, I have to say, I have always found the lead title of Hitchens' book in supremely bad taste. Kind of hard to, that's an all-time low in my opinion, but we would probably be wise to make helpful use of the book's subtitle. Indeed, in any human endeavor, there is almost always a gap between idealizing theory and concrete practice on the ground. And it would be irresponsible to discount the evidence surfacing now in critical accounts of the activities of the missionaries that Mother Teresa's stated theories about fruitful interreligious cooperation in the service of the poorest of the poor were not always put into effect. Only time and further investigative reporting will determine the truth of such reports and whether they are sufficient to damn Mother Teresa for rank hypocrisy on this point, a failing of which many of her critics accuse her. My purpose here tonight is not to engage such criticisms, either to affirm them or to provide an apologia for the missionaries of charity. What I will do is, again, first highlight the facts about the religiously diverse context for Mother Teresa's ministry. Secondly, I will note that at least in published statements attributed to her, Mother Teresa affirmed such a context and expressed her conviction that the tolerance she embraced in conducting her ministry in a country as diverse as India was not incompatible with her own deeply committed Catholic faith. This talk will then conclude with some thoughts as to whether Mother Teresa's stated views on the value of Catholic witness in a pluralistic world would receive the same commendation today as they did during her lifetime. Ironically, what I will say may in the end render criticisms of Mother Teresa on this point moot, since I do not think her statements in this area, whether they were backed up by practice or not, will be a significant factor in the Roman Catholic Church's evaluation of her over the long term. I'd like to start off by reminding you of some of the basic facts of Mother Teresa's life. Mother Teresa was born Agnes Bojaniu on August 26, 1910, in the city of Skopje, now part of the independent Republic of Macedonia. Her parents were Nicola and Dranafile Bojaniu, and Mother Teresa was the youngest of 3 children. Here we have a picture of Mother Teresa's mother in her widowhood. She is Dranafile with some other family relatives. And here's a picture of Mother Teresa as, I think, early adolescent with her siblings. This is her on the bottom. As some of her biographers have commented, determining what country Mother Teresa's birthplace belonged to in her early years is not an easy thing, given the tumultuous history of the Balkans. As far as I can determine, when Mother Teresa was born in 1910, Skopje was part of the Ottoman Empire, ruled by Muslim Turkish leaders in Constantinople. However, after the First and Second Balkan Wars in the year 1913, Skopje became part of Serbia, and then in 1918, part of the Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which eventually became the country known as Yugoslavia. Mother Teresa's family was Albanian from the Kosovo region, now under UN control after the Bosnian Wars of the 1990s, though the history of Kosovo is a little more complicated than that. It's recently declared independence. If you remember anything about the horrible ethnic conflicts that drove the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, you'll remember that this area was highly diverse ethnically and religiously. Among the Albanians, 70% had converted to Islam after the Islamic conquest in the late Middle Ages. 20% were Orthodox, and only 10% were Roman Catholic. The area had in fact been converted to Christianity in apostolic times as part of the Roman region called Illyricum. The Albanian Muslims in the area were by and large Sunni, but among their number were some belonging to the Bektazi sect, a group that incorporated some aspects of Christian ritual and belief into its practice of Islam. More than one scholar has noted that contrary to perceptions in the West, during much of the Ottoman period, and certainly during Mother Teresa's early life in the early 20th century, the many ethnic and religious communities in the Balkans and in cities like Skopje coexisted in relative harmony. In fact, one Albanian researcher on Mother Teresa has argued, quote, Mother Teresa seems to have been very much a product of a tolerant environment where individuals and communities coexisted and thrived without being a threat to each other or being perceived as such, unquote. It is possible, indeed I think likely, that this early environment of religious diversity was a significant factor in Mother Teresa's ability later in life to undertake ministry in such a diverse religious arena as India and to encourage and coordinate assistance for it from persons of many different religious orientations. Given Mother Teresa's own commitment to the poorest of the poor and her legendary personal austerity, you may be surprised to learn that she came from comfortable upper middle class origins. Her father was a businessman who owned construction and wholesale food companies. He was the only Roman Catholic member of the Skopje City Council, and in the course of his career had mastered several languages, including Albanian, Serbo-Croatian, Turkish, Italian, and French. He was also active in Albanian nationalist politics, promoting the creation of an Albanian homeland in Kosovo. Mother Teresa therefore grew up in a relatively affluent and sophisticated environment where discussions about Albanian politics and culture predominated at meals. Here we have a picture of her with her sister in native dress. Because it may have some bearing on her future ministry, we should note that Mother Teresa experienced downward mobility during her childhood. When she was 8 or 9 years old, her father went off to a political meeting in Belgrade, only to return in agonizing pain, from which he died shortly thereafter. The result of what now scholars think was poisoning at the hands of Serbian terrorists intent on quashing the Albanian nationalist movement. And that piece of information comes from the Albanian scholar of Mother Teresa, who says that what seems to have happened to Mother Teresa's mother has a parallel elsewhere in the same period. One scholar reports that people of all religions came to Nicola Bojanju's funeral, which was probably to be expected for a public figure in such a religiously diverse area. After the death of Mother Teresa's father, this family experienced a significant reduction in their standard of living, although Dranafile, Mother Teresa's mother, supported her children with a sewing business. Mother Teresa was educated at her parish school for her primary education, but then went on to public gymnasium for high school. Here we have a picture of her taken sometime around the time she graduated from high school. When she was 18, Mother Teresa decided to enter the Loreto order with the specific intent of becoming a missionary in India. As I noted in the first of these Tuohy lectures, the Loreto order was a branch of Mary Ward's Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary. As you may remember, the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary was founded in England and in the Low Countries in the early 17th century. The Loreto branch of the Institute had been established in Ireland in the early 19th century by a woman named Frances Ball. The order was devoted to running Catholic schools for girls and had had a presence in India since 1841. Mother Teresa had learned about Catholic missions in India from Jesuit priests who served her home parish in Skopje. Accordingly, she left home in 1928, spending a brief period learning English at the order's mother house in Ireland. She then traveled on to Darjeeling, India, where she completed her novitiate, in the process learning Hindi and Bengali, though critics fault her master of the latter language, and it is a fact that English is the required language of the missionaries of charity today. After some teaching and service at a small medical station in that region, in the early 1930s, Mother Teresa was transferred to Loreto Antali, a compound in the eastern industrial part of the city of Calcutta, where the order ran two schools: St. Joseph's for wealthy Bengali girls from Christian, Hindu, Anglo-Indian, and Parsi backgrounds, that is, practitioners of the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, and who were taught in English. The other school was called St. Mary's, and it was for girls from middle class and poor backgrounds who were taught in Bengali. Mother Teresa began teaching history and geography in the latter school, and then around the year 1935, she also started teaching at the St. Teresa Primary School run by the order, which was some distance from Antali and required Mother Teresa to travel across the city. Some scholars contend that it was the result of what she observed on these crosstown trips that planted the seeds of Mother Teresa's later ministry to Calcutta's poverty-stricken slum dwellers. Up to this time, she had been relatively sheltered from the city's poverty by the fact that she lived in monastic enclosure in Antali, never leaving the compound. However, you should also note that Mother Teresa seems to have received a good deal of formation in practical charity growing up from her parents, who are reported to have regularly fed poor people at the family table, often identifying such guests to the sometimes mystified children as distant relatives. And I always kind of imagine that slightly comically, these 7- and 8-year-olds kind of looking down the table and thinking, this is cousin who? Many biographies also mention Mother Teresa's mother's care for an elderly alcoholic neighbor who suffered from unsightly skin lesions, which perhaps predisposed Mother Teresa later to take concern for those in Calcutta suffering from Hansen's disease, otherwise known as leprosy. By the late 1930s, Mother Teresa's growing consciousness of the desperate plight of Calcutta's impoverished citizens encouraged her and selected students to go into the slums on Sunday afternoons to visit and to offer help. Certainly, conditions in the city deteriorated as a result of the combined effects of the disruptions of World War II, natural disasters that resulted in famine, and the escalating tensions between Hindus and Muslims in the city in the period immediately before and after independence and partition in 1947. Whether these events precipitated Mother Teresa's departure from Loreto, or there is some other explanation less accessible to historical scrutiny, the fact is Mother Teresa received what she always called the call within a call on September 10th, 1946, on a train on the way to her annual retreat in Darjeeling. The date is now celebrated among the missionaries of charity as Inspiration Day. The call told her she was to leave Loreto and found a new religious congregation devoted to poverty, chastity, and obedience, as with many religious orders in the history of Catholicism, but also devoted to service to the poorest of the poor. In keeping with the regulations surrounding solemn vows in the pre-Vatican II period, Mother Teresa had to wait for almost 2 years to be released from her vows to Loreto, but finally succeeded in receiving permission to leave in August of 1948. After a brief period studying nursing with the medical mission sisters in Patna, she returned to Calcutta to work in the slums, opening a small school and seeking to provide whatever assistance she could. By 1949, some of her former students from Antali had come to help her, and in 1950 she regularized the group's life by formally establishing herself and her sisters as a diocesan congregation called the Missionaries of Charity. And we could say the rest is history. Throughout the 1950s, the work of the Missionaries of Charity expanded throughout the city of Calcutta, though again, the actual numerical scope of its activities is now being challenged in various studies. Mother Teresa in this period opened a hospice, a home for the dying, called Nirmal Hriday, or Place of the Immaculate Heart. This first home for the dying is located to this day in a dormitory once used for pilgrims to the temple devoted to the Hindu goddess of death and fertility, Kali. The order also, here actually are a couple of pictures from the home for the dying. The order also opened homes for orphaned or abandoned children and leper clinics. In 1959, the work of the Missionaries of Charity spread outside Calcutta. And in 1965, the order made its first foundation outside of India in Venezuela. Throughout this period, the order expanded in numbers. It eventually would include branches for lay brothers, priests, contemplative nuns and brothers, and various lay associates. Those involved in active ministry care for the sick and dying, including, beginning in the 1980s, AIDS patients. They run orphanages, do pastoral visiting, work with victims of natural disasters, as well as engage in catechetical work. By the late 1970s, the work of Mother Teresa and her Missionaries of Charity had become known throughout the world and was highly admired by Catholics and non-Catholics alike. Many commentators see Mother Teresa's ascent into widespread public recognition and even adulation as beginning with British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge's 1969 television movie, Something Beautiful for God. Mother Teresa was granted numerous awards by many societies and national governments. She was the first non-Indian to receive the Indian Order of the Lotus, whose insignia now adorns the statue of the Virgin Mary outside the Nirmal Hriday Home for the Dying in Calcutta. Mother Teresa won the British Order of Merit in 1983 and the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1984. Perhaps less well known, but certainly relevant to this talk, Mother Teresa won the Templeton Award for Progress in Religion in 1973, a prize judged by a panel of 9 representatives from the major world faiths. Her greatest public recognition in her lifetime came, of course, upon winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979. Some might say, however, that Mother Teresa received her greatest award posthumously. After some years of declining health, Mother Teresa died in September of 1997 in Calcutta. As some of you may recall, the same weekend Princess Diana was killed in Paris. The usual 5-year waiting period to open the cause for her canonization was waived, and consequently Mother Teresa was beatified, that is, declared blessed, the penultimate state towards final sainthood, in 2003. I suppose this is the biggest award anyone could ever receive. Of course, being declared a saint is distinctive of Catholic culture, and Mother Teresa was nothing if not Catholic. Given the media exposure she enjoyed during her lifetime, and to some extent even afterwards, I would say that Mother Teresa remains one of the most visible icons of Catholicism in modern times. But as I've suggested, Mother Teresa is an unusual Catholic icon in that her entire life was spent in multi-faith environments. I've already described the religiously diverse environment in which Mother Teresa grew up. I'd now like to say a bit more about the religiously diverse area in which Mother Teresa began her pastoral ministry with the order she founded. Indeed, when you read biographies of Mother Teresa, what surprises is just how expansive the interreligious context for the work of the Missionaries of Charity was. To begin with, Mother Teresa was, of course, active as a missionary in India, one of the most religiously diverse places on earth. This was obvious already from my description of the religious background of the girls Mother Teresa taught at Loreto and Tali, where students came from Christian, Hindu, Muslim, and Parsi backgrounds. One could have added to the mix Jainists, Buddhists, and Sikhs. When Mother Teresa first arrived in Calcutta in the late 1920s, there was even a small Jewish community in the city, which had been documented since the 18th century. Christianity had existed in southern India in the Kerala region since apostolic times. It actually is related to Syrian Christianity. Roman Catholicism took root in the country with the arrival of the Jesuits in the 16th century. Protestant missionaries of various denominations began to arrive with the British colonists in the late 18th century and expanded their efforts considerably during the 19th century. In view of this richness of religious diversity, it is entirely understandable that the 25th anniversary celebrations of the foundation of the Missionaries of Charity involved celebrations at over 15 different places of worship across the city of Calcutta, involving, according to Mother Teresa's report, prayer with Jews, Armenians, Anglicans, Jains, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Hindus. And here's actually a picture from one of those celebrations. Here's another one. In such an environment, it was clear that the recipients of Mother Teresa's service would belong to all different religions, the majority non-Christian, and from the start, she seems to have embraced that intentionally. To one visitor to the Home for the Dying in Calcutta, she said, quote, "God is here. Caste and creeds mean nothing. It does not matter that they are not of my faith," unquote. A number of sources claim that by Mother Teresa's express orders, service was to be offered to all, regardless of confessional status, and that recipients were never required to say Christian prayers or accept Christian rites in return for service. In addition, they claim that Mother Teresa, out of respect for others' religious loyalties, insisted that recipients of service receive rites of their own religious traditions if they requested it. Thus, in the Home for the Dying, numerous reports claim that Mother Teresa made it a policy to offer people the religious services for the dying and deceased appropriate to their professed religion. For example, allowing volunteer organizations of Hindus, Muslims, and other religious groups to bury or cremate the dead in accordance with their religious affiliation. She's also reported to have given Hindus waters from the Ganges as they were dying, which is part of their funerary piety. It is reported that when in doubt, inmates of the home were buried according to Hindu rites, or cremated according to Hindu rites. Likewise, according to another report, Mother Teresa made sure that children in her homes for orphans and abandoned children had celebrations in keeping with their particular religions. Catherine Spink, admittedly an authorized biographer, relates this in a story about the beginnings of the missionary co-workers, a lay group of individuals worldwide who supported the work of the vowed missionaries. She tells of Anne Blakey, a British expatriate who eventually became head of the co-workers, soliciting gifts from a group of other British women for Christmas toys for Christian children in Mother Teresa's homes. No sooner had they done so than Mother Teresa turned around and solicited comparable gifts for the Muslim children for Ramadan. And then a short time later, more gifts for the Hindu children in honor of the festival of Diwali. I have to say, I think this story has the ring of truth because it is consistent with what is reported about Mother Teresa's sometimes disconcerting persistence in seeking aid for the distressed she wanted to serve. If anyone here has seen the documentary on Mother Teresa by the Canadian filmmakers Anne and Susan Petrie, the same quality is on display in the meeting in Beirut in the early 1980s, when Mother Teresa proceeds to steamroll several male clerics who are opposed to her plan to retrieve a group of handicapped children abandoned because of fighting in the city. Mother Teresa was the kind of person who, when she had decided upon something, wouldn't take no for an answer, and in fact could be quite brazen about requesting aid and cooperation from persons equipped to give it. Again, not everyone appreciated this. This stated policy of allowing those the missionaries served to practice their own religion in the institutions the missionaries ran in India may find confirmation later in Mother Teresa's career when in 1991 she was allowed to open missionary homes in Albania after the abandonment of the government's previous anti-religious policy. During the visit, the president of Albania asked Mother Teresa to open 6 churches in Tirana, previously used for secular purposes. She did so, but then reportedly insisted on opening a mosque for the Muslim inhabitants of the city, which she and her sisters proceeded to help clean. Again, I have to admit, in all honesty, that as appealing as these reports of Mother Teresa's accommodations to the religious convictions of those she served may be, there are numerous reports that such policies were not uniformly observed in the institutions run by the missionaries of charity. Books critical of the missionaries speak of baptisms given to unconscious patients, of food aid given by preference to converts to Catholicism, and the removal of Hindu holy cards from patients in the home for the dying. While I can neither deny nor affirm the truth of such reports, it must be noted that such reports often come from writers under the influence either of forceful post-colonial rhetoric hostile to the entire project of Western missionary activity, or rationalist rhetoric critical of religion as a whole. Indeed, one of the most difficult things to cope with in assessing material about Mother Teresa is the powerful biases that exist both among those supportive and those critical of her and the missionaries. Likewise, critics may be unfairly unsympathetic to the problem Mother Teresa may have had implementing her more tolerant policies among her subordinates in an order that expanded with remarkable rapidity during its early years. One source I consulted for this talk asserts that at the time of Mother Teresa's death in 1997, the missionaries of charity numbered over 4,000 nuns. That's a lot. Marks rapid growth in less than 50 years. It's actually comparable to the early Franciscans in the 13th century. Such rapid expansion can lead to irregularities in practice, and if such was the case, Mother Teresa would certainly not be the first in the history of Catholic religious life to be accused of going too far, too fast, and letting important details fall by the wayside in the process. Mary Ward was accused of the same in the early 17th century, with the disastrous results for her order that I outlined in the first of these 2 lectures. I will say that the wholesale dismissal of Mother Teresa's claims to be concerned for the religious rights of those she served perhaps do not give her enough credit for the sophisticated ability to deal with religious difference she may have developed in her native homeland. Again, this is not to say she was able to communicate this ability effectively to other members of her order. In addition to her stated policy of protecting the rights of those she served to practice their religion unmolested, Mother Teresa welcomed the assistance of many non-Catholics from the start of the missionaries' ministry. This is an aspect of her ministry wherein the facts are fairly uncontroversial. Before they were disbanded as an official organization in the 1990s, the co-workers of the Missionaries of Charity had members of every religious orientation and many without express religious affiliation. Incidentally, co-workers was a title Mahatma Gandhi used for his associates, and Mother Teresa's admiration for the great Hindu spiritual and political theorist is well documented. She did name one of her leprosy centers in India after Gandhiji. The same went for the numerous volunteers that very quickly became involved in work at the missionaries' homes. Books that describe the missionaries' home for the dying or their homes for abandoned children or reports from volunteers who have worked with the missionaries frequently note the presence among volunteers of persons of all faiths and no faiths. Again, this was in keeping with Mother Teresa's express orders. She admitted, quote, "We would not be able to do our work without our volunteers. They come from many different backgrounds, cultures, and faiths. All that we require of them is to be able to give love and time to others," unquote. Here's another interesting piece of evidence about the multicultural interfaith context for Mother Teresa's work. Even among Mother Teresa's close Catholic associates, there were a number who had either come from or who had studied extensively non-Catholic cultures. For example, Mother Teresa's spiritual director from 1944, who advised her through her difficult departure from the Loreto order, was Father Celeste van Exem. He was a Belgian Jesuit, an expert in Arabic and in Islam, who had lived with Bedouin Arabs for some time. He then learned Urdu and came to Calcutta in 1944 for the specific purpose of working with the city's Muslim population. The first superior of the contemplative female branch of the Missionaries of Charity, who eventually succeeded Mother Teresa as head of the entire Missionaries of Charity order, was Sister Nirmala Joshi. She is of Nepalese origin and belonged to a Hindu Brahmin family before converting to Catholicism and entering the order. One scholar reports that when Mother Teresa was considering starting the contemplative branch of the Missionaries of Charity, she sent Sister Nirmala to spend time with Father Bede Griffiths at his hermitage in southern India. Bede Griffiths was a British man who had been educated at Oxford, where incidentally C.S. Lewis was his tutor. He converted to Catholicism as an adult and eventually took vows as a Camaldolese Benedictine monk. Later in life, he traveled to India, where he studied Indian religion and wrote extensively on Hindu-Christian dialogue. It is important to stress that this pattern within the life of the Missionaries of Charity of officially stated respect for, service to, and cooperation with persons of other faith traditions seems to have come from Mother Teresa's direction and was in keeping with a self-conscious philosophy of ministry on her part. I would like to lay out some of the evidence for this now. Of course, we need to be careful about assessing Mother Teresa's statements about interreligious cooperation, since first, it is clear that she was not formally educated in theology or in the specific disciplines of ecumenism and missiology. Secondly, we must remember that Mother Teresa's published statements about such matters emerge from what is essentially an oral tradition, such as we find in the early Christian period with the sayings of the desert fathers and mothers, or in the Middle Ages with the little flowers of St. Francis of Assisi. Such statements as are attributed to Mother Teresa will always be less secure in their attribution and form than if Mother Teresa had committed her thoughts to formal essays and treatises, which she did not. She always said that she never really prepared her public talks, she always just prayed. In addition, at least one critic has noted, the essentially oral nature of Mother Teresa's pronouncements renders some of her statements about the missionaries' activities prone to the exaggeration typical of oral genres of discourse. Still, we can say that certain views with regard to interreligious relations emerge fairly consistently from the material attributed to her. To begin with, in India, Mother Teresa publicly advocated religious liberty and praised both the Indian people and the residents of Calcutta for their religious tolerance. In fact, Calcutta did have a long tradition of religious tolerance, and some of Mother Teresa's critics say she benefited from that. Mother Teresa also asserted that religion is a matter of conscience, that should not be coerced by the state or by those offering aid. She said in one statement, quote, "Religion is not something that you or I can touch. Religion is the worship of God, therefore a matter of conscience. I alone must decide for myself and you for yourself what we choose. No man, no law, no government has the right to prevent me or force me or anyone if I choose to embrace the religion that gives me peace, joy, and love," unquote. All human beings are equal before God and should be respected as such by persons of whatever religious persuasion and by governments. In keeping with her respect for conscience, Mother Teresa admits that the external observer cannot judge what goes on within a human being from a religious point of view. As she says, quote, "God has his own ways and means to work in the hearts of men, and we do not know how close they are to him. But by their actions we will always know whether they are at his disposal or not. How you live your life is the proof that you are or are not fully his, whether one is a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian," unquote. If you have read the recent book of Mother Teresa's correspondence, "Come Be My Light," you will recognize that mysterious phrase, which seems to have been quite important in her own spirituality, that language of being at God's disposal. It shows up, particularly in her correspondence about her move out of Loreto and the initial stages of starting the Missionaries of Charity. In a similar statement, Mother Teresa reiterates, quote, "The way you live your life is the measure of your belonging to God. We cannot condemn or judge or speak words that might hurt. Perhaps a person has never heard of Christianity. If so, we do not know in what manner God appears in this soul and in what way he has this soul serve his purpose. By what right, then, can we condemn anyone?" Unquote. Elsewhere, when pressed, Mother Teresa admitted that as a vowed religious with a specifically missionary vocation, her ultimate goal was to convert others, though in one statement she gave quite a nuanced explanation of what she meant by conversion. It's kind of a long quote. Okay, quote, "Oh, I hope I am converting. I don't mean what you think. I hope we are converting hearts. Not even Almighty God can convert a person unless that person wants it. What we are all trying to do by our work, by serving the people, is to come closer to God. If in coming face to face with God we accept him in our lives, then we are converting. We become a better Hindu, a better Muslim, a better Catholic, a better whatever we are. And then by being better can come closer and closer to him. If we accept him fully in our lives, then that is conversion. What approach would I use? For me, naturally, it would be a Catholic one. For you, it may be Hindu, for someone else Buddhist, according to one's conscience. What God is in your mind, you must accept. But I cannot prevent myself giving you what I have," unquote. So what Mother Teresa is saying in statements like this is that she believes that God communicates himself to all people through the medium of conscience, and awareness of his presence is expressed through ethical action. Religions other than Christianity can become vehicles for the articulation and expression of conscience, though in ways unknown to us, and should be respected as means of salvation for those who reject or who were never exposed to the gospel. Catholic Christianity is Mother Teresa's chosen vehicle for the service of God, and she claims the right to proclaim and practice this. But she does this granting completely equal rights to others to profess other faiths or no faith. Looking at Mother Teresa within her historical context, and particularly in view of the public recognition and support of her work given to her in papal circles beginning with the pontificate of Paul VI in the 1960s. We can say that part of the reason for such recognition is that Mother Teresa expressed some of the new insights regarding Catholicism's relationship to other world religions stemming from the Second Vatican Council. Here we're going to see some similarities with what I said last week in my talk on Carol Houselander. Mother Teresa's granted, informal and non-systematic statements confirm what Vatican II was saying, for example, in the statement Dignitatis Humanae, about the necessity for governments to protect religious liberty, and in Nostra Aetate, on the esteem and respect owed to all who practice non-Christian religions. In the long quotation I just cited from Mother Teresa, we find many parallels with the passage in chapter 16 of the Pastoral Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, wherein the Council Fathers assert that, quote, those who through no fault of their own do not know the gospel of Christ or his church, but who nevertheless seek God with a sincere heart and moved by grace, try in their actions to do his will as they know it through the dictates of conscience, those too may achieve eternal salvation, unquote. Mother Teresa, too, I think, represents the perfect instantiation of the missionary ideal as articulated in the Council's document on missions, Ad Gentes, in that her work was first, motivated by charity, second, marked by close identification with the poor, third, focused on promoting human dignity by education and service, and fourth, informed by knowledge of and respect for the culture in which the missionary acts. Hence, the very public support the Vatican gave to Mother Teresa in the latter third of her life was consistent with the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, determined to bring the Roman Catholic Church out of its former defensive stance and into a position of greater openness to the non-Catholic world. My question is, would Mother Teresa receive the same kind of commendation for her approach to missionary work today? Recent encyclicals issued during the pontificate of John Paul II, such as Redemptoris Missio from 1990 and Dominus Jesus from 2000, have, amid some controversy, sought to qualify some of the Second Vatican Council's statements about the relationship between Roman Catholicism and other Christian denominations and non-Christian religions. In these documents, we see emphatic assertions that the fullness of salvation comes exclusively with full participation in the Roman Catholic Church, and that other religious postures contain, quote, gaps, insufficiencies, and errors, unquote. Redemptoris Missio, in particular, is at pains to criticize statements that suggest relativism, that, quote, one religion is as good as another, unquote, or that the purpose of missionary work is to, quote, help people become more human or more faithful to their own religion, unquote. In view of these statements, I can't help but think that Mother Teresa might come in for some criticism, since we can document a number of just such relativistic statements in her oral tradition. In addition to the statements I've already cited, we can cite more. For example, one statement attributed to her says, quote, faith in action through prayer, faith in action through service. Each is the same thing, the same love, the same compassion. We all have to proclaim that faith. This is something that should encourage us and should be strength for us, that we complete each other more fully. Because we are human beings, we need this distinction, this separation, these different names. The soul, the mind, and the heart, however, have the same thing: total surrender to God. At the moment we realize that we have really done that, then we are at his disposal, and there are no more differences. unquote. Elsewhere, Mother Teresa says, quote, "It matters to the individual what church he belongs to," unquote. And in another passage she says about God, quote, "Some call him Ishvar, some call him Allah, some simply God. But all have to acknowledge that it is he who made us for greater things, to love and be loved. What matters is that we love," unquote. I would argue that what we have here are just the sort of relativistic statements that papal teaching has sought to curtail in recent encyclicals, statements that suggest that differences between religions are essentially human creations in search of the proper response to the transcendent God who reveals himself, and equally valid if pursued according to conscience. In my last lecture on Carol Houselander, I have characterized such a position as embodying Harvard professor Diana Eck's definition of religious pluralism. Though Eck is clear that true pluralism is not simply equivalent to relativism, but assumes real commitment to one's own tradition in combination with an openness to others of different faith traditions. Certainly, Mother Teresa could never be faulted for a lack of commitment to Catholicism, which is why her stance might well be compatible with Eck's definition of religious pluralism. Vatican II, as I noted last week, articulates more of an inclusivist position on other religions and expressions of Christianity, asserting that while other religious postures contain discrete elements that tend to salvation, Catholicism alone contains all the elements leading to the fullness of salvation. While I think recent encyclicals have not significantly moved away from the inclusivist thinking of the documents of Vatican II, their pointed comments on the deficiencies of other religious positions at least raises the perception that the Church is swinging back to a more exclusivist position, again, such as one saw in the immediate post-Reformation period with Marie de l'Incarnation. What is interesting about Mother Teresa's public statements about non-Catholic religions is that they seem to express the pluralistic outlook that would probably not pass Vatican muster at this moment if closely scrutinized. Thus, I suspect that in the formal process that has been opened for Mother Teresa's canonization, these statements will come in for some negative assessment. Do I think they will prove the deal breaker? I'm sure not, as advocates for the cause will likely point to Mother Teresa's lack of theological sophistication and perhaps even the uncertainty of determining the authenticity of statements attributed to her to excuse her. If Mother Teresa is canonized, and I think it highly likely she will be, perhaps within my own lifetime, it will be not necessarily as an icon for the age of global Catholicism, respectfully taking its place among the myriad expressions of religious responses to the transcendent, but on the basis of her heroic conformity to long-cherished essentials of Catholic Christian discipleship. Her devotion to the traditional corporal works of mercy, however imperfect from a scientific or bureaucratic point of view. Her consistent asceticism, her fidelity to prayer and the sacraments, and yes, her unwavering support for the pro-life ethic of official magisterial teaching. On this point, Benedict XVI's repeated references to Mother Teresa in his first papal encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, are likely prophetic. Mother Teresa may have been born and died within multi-faith environments, but perhaps in the long run will be best understood and appreciated within a Catholic context. Thank you for your attention.
That was sensational. Now,